we have been discussing about this paper entitled Introduction to Philosophy, which has been introduced to semester 1 students of the UGCF NEP syllabi of the University of Delhi. We have discussed about the introductory explanations about metaphysics and epistemology in our previous lecture. Now we will be discussing majorly from the Indian theme. This is Dr. Ananya Barua, Associate Professor in the Department of Philosophy, Hindu College. Now, the first thing first, the key themes in Indian philosophy or the Pramana Vada is when the Indian philosophies developed detailed analysis of knowledge sources. Different schools accept different pramanas. For example, Nyaya accepts 4. Buddhism often accepts 2. Perception and inference. With Nyaya, it is perception, inference, shabda, and verbal testimony. And Advaita emphasizes scriptural testimony and direct realization. Epistemology is central in Indian thought. The metaphysical part of Indian philosophy would ask questions like, what is ultimately real? Is the self permanent? Is reality one or many? Some systems are realists like Nyaya, some are dualists like Sankhya, some are non-dualists like Advaita Vedanta, some deny substantial reality altogether like Madhyamakarika. So, when we talk about self and liberation, unlike much Western philosophy, Indian philosophy often connects knowledge to liberation, moksha. Knowledge is not just intellectual, it transforms existence. There are interesting parallels of Sankhya's dualism resembling some Greek dualisms. The Nyaya logic, for example, parallels with Aristotle. The Madhyamic skepticism resembles certain Greek skeptical traditions. Advaita's non-dualism resembles Neoplatonism in some ways. However, Indian philosophy places stronger emphasis on liberation and practical transformation. In many Indian systems, metaphysical ignorance causes suffering. True knowledge reveals ultimate reality. Liberation follows from right understanding. For example, in Advaita Vedanta, ignorance makes us think we are separate individuals. Knowledge reveals identity with Brahman. In Buddhism, ignorance makes us believe in a permanent self. Insight reveals emptiness. Thus, epistemology and metaphysics are deeply connected to existential transformation. Indian philosophy influences modern debates about consciousness, self and no self, constructed identity, non-dual awareness, embodiment and mediation research. Neuroscience studies mediation and self-experience, partly inspired by Indian traditions. Indian philosophy understands that it is a vast and diverse tradition that explores what is real, knowledge, self, how can suffering end. So it contains realist systems, dualist systems, non-dualist, radical, anti-essentialist, you just name it. For there cannot be only one way. There are many paths, there are many ways, as many disciples, as many paths. Unlike much Western philosophy, Indian thought strongly integrates epistemology, metaphysics, and spiritual transformation. In Plato, for example, when we talk about episteme and doxa, we see that doxa has been considered as something which is to do with opinion, belief, which can be true or false or unstable. Episteme, on the other hand, is considered to be knowledge, stable, justified, grounded in reality. Plato distinguishes realm and the mental state. He says that doxa, the state of doxa, which is a mental state, belongs to appearances, while the state of episteme belongs to the eternal forms. Aristotle refines these, and he says that episteme is demonstrative knowledge, which is scientific necessary, and doxa is probable reasoning. So from the beginning, knowledge is more than belief. It requires stability, justification, and truth. This becomes the core problem of epistemology. Even when we go through the primary readings of Duncan Pritchard on knowledge, we see that Pritchard, a major contemporary epistemologist who has been working on the Gettier problem, the epistemic Locke, anti-Locke epistemology, virtue epistemology, the hinge epistemology, which is inspired by Wittgenstein. And the most important one of all is the Gettier problem. The Gettier problem is how knowledge has been traditionally defined. JTB. Edmund Gettier in 1963 showed that one can have true belief, justification, but it could be true only by luck. So the justified true belief is insufficient. Pritchard's key move was that knowledge excludes epistemic luck. If your belief is true by accident, it is not knowledge. Pritchard argues about the anti-Locke epistemology that knowledge is true belief that could not easily have been false in nearby possible worlds. If it could easily have gone wrong, it is not knowledge. For example, if I look at a real clock that works, it is knowledge. If I look at a stopped clock that just happens to show the correct time, it is luck, not knowledge. So he also integrates virtue knowledge, where he says that knowledge arises from cognitive ability. You know something when your belief is true because of your intellectual competence, not just accidental success. And this he calls as virtue epistemology. Now, this hinge epistemology has been told, inspired by Wittgenstein. Some beliefs like the world exists, I have hands, there is an external world, there are, these are not known in the usual evidential sense. They are hinges, background commitments that make knowledge possible. So knowledge rests on non-propositional trust structures. This connects epistemology with metaphysics. Beliefs are temporarily located states. If eternalism is true, past, present, future, all equally true. That belief about time becomes complicated. Is belief about now objectively true or indexical? It might just be that one investigates how belief content relates to temporal ontology. There is also a rational belief. Miller explains how beliefs updates across time, how rationality works in a dynamic systems, how future directed beliefs relate to metaphysical views of time. Miller connects thus belief formation to metaphysical structure of time. Unlike classical epistemologists who focus on justification alone, Miller shows your metaphysics about time, persistence, reality, shapes, what counts as rational belief. If time is unreal, then belief about future events becomes philosophically puzzling. Today's Pritchard and Miller's difference ought to be mentioned. For Pritchard, the focus has been conditions for knowledge. Concerns such as luck, justification, skepticism were dominant. The method has been prominently analytical epistemology. For Miller, the focus has been on nature of belief across time. The concern has been majorly metaphysical structure of reality, and the method has been analytic metaphysics and philosophy of mind. Pritchard strengthens the concept of knowledge. Miller depends the ontology behind belief. Now, if we look at the PPT here that is being displayed, we see that how metaphysics and epistemology connect. For the aspect of knowledge, the core focus of Duncan Pritchard is on knowledge. For Christy Miller, it is belief. For the aspect of the main problem, Duncan Pritchard has been about the epistemic lack. For Christy Miller, it is about the temporal structure of belief, and the key idea in Duncan Pritchard has been knowledge excluding luck. For Miller, it is belief depending on metaphysics of time. The methodology in Pritchard we see is anti-luck theory, virtue epistemology. In Miller, it is metaphysical analysis of time and persistence. Now, on the views of JTB, Duncan Pritchard of course says it is insufficient. For Miller, it was less central. Similarly, in our aspect of skepticism, we see Duncan Pritchard's work about developing an anti-skeptical hinge model. For Christy Miller, she explores how metaphysics affects rational belief. To the link to metaphysics, Duncan Pritchard is via hinge commitments. For Christy Miller, it is directly via ontology of time. And last but not the least, with the Greek parallel, Duncan Pritchard is all about episteme refinement. For Christy Miller, it is doxa within temporal reality. So we see that there can be interesting parallels. Nyaya, for example, where knowledge is considered to be the true cognition produced by reliable means, pramana, similar to anti-luck plus competence theory. The Buddhist epistemology, Dignaga or Dharmakriti, emphasizes on valid cognition. It excludes accidental correctness. It is close to Pritchard's anti-luck idea. About Advaita Vedanta, it distinguishes empirical belief versus ultimate knowledge, similar to episteme versus doxa. So one can actually see a layered picture. If Greek philosophy, on the one hand, talks about events such as belief versus knowledge, modern epistemology talks about justification versus luck. Pritchard, on the other hand, talks about safe, ability-based true belief. Miller, on the other hand, talks about belief which is embedded in metaphysical time structures, and Indian philosophy, of course, we know, is something where knowledge must arise from pramana and not accident. Pritchard protects knowledge from collapse into luck. Miller shows belief cannot be separated from metaphysical commitments. Together they demonstrate epistemology is never purely about belief. It is always entangled with metaphysics. Exactly the theme you have been exactly the theme that the undergraduate students you have been trying to connect, and this is where more exercise and more insights ought to be given to discuss and to compare the primary readers, the primary readings of Pritchard and Miller to have a grasp. Only when we go through the primary sources can we be able to trace the commonalities, the differences, the bridges and the like. Again, as much as Pritchard might be protecting knowledge from collapsing into luck, whereas Miller might be showing belief that is which cannot be separated from metaphysical commitments, please understand there is a subtle continuity even in them. Not everything needs to be thesis and antithesis. And again, my humble request here is the students must go through the primary readings if they have to have a grasp of these part more clearly. Now, from knowledge and belief, from episteme and doxa, we see that the distinction has been pronounced. In the Greek separation between episteme and doxa, contemporary debates, particularly in Duncan Pritchard and Christy Miller, it showed that this distinction is not merely epistemological, it is deeply metaphysical. When Pritchard refines the conditions under which belief becomes knowledge, Miller investigates the metaphysical structure within which belief operates, especially regarding time. Thus, the contemporary debate shows that epistemology and metaphysics are inseparable. So, if we then are to sum up what have we done so far, we understand that the Greek foundation plays a significant role in belief and knowledge. Be it Plato with his doxa, which was considered to be opinion that was fallible, unstable. There was episteme, the knowledge of forms, stable and necessary. And again, knowledge was something which was considered to be ontologically grounded. Aristotle had refined knowledge as demonstrative, necessary understanding, which he called as science dia. And we see that knowledge required more than true belief. It requires non-accidental grounding. And this anticipates modern anti-luck theories. Duncan Pritchard, we had seen his central aim or central problem had been the Gettier challenge, where the traditional JTB and Gettier showed that we can have justified true belief that is true by accident. So knowledge must exclude epistemic luck. So he said that his anti-luck epistemology theory is like knowledge requires truth, belief, safety. This is the model. And it is nearby possible worlds where the belief would be false. It is not knowledge. Thus, knowledge must be counterfactually stable. This mirrors Plato's idea. Knowledge must be tied to something stable in reality. In the virtue epistemology, there is this ability condition where Pritchard argues that knowledge arises from intellectual virtue, the cognitive competence. So knowledge is true belief because of our epistemic ability, not because of luck. And this, again, as mentioned, comes close to Nyaya's Pramana theory, where valid knowledge arises from reliable cognitive processes. We had also talked about the hinge epistemology of Wittgenstein, where some beliefs like the world exists, other minds exists, are not known evidentially, but they function as framework conditions. So, epistemology rests on non-evidential commitments. Here, epistemology touches metaphysics directly. Now, with Christy Miller, we had revised, revisited, discussed how her works primarily is on metaphysics of time, but her relevance to knowledge belief lies in this. Belief is temporarily structured. So, the key question then for Miller is, how can belief be rational if time itself is a metaphysically puzzling event? Consider presentism, where only the present exists, or eternalism, where past, present, future are equally real. Now, MacTaggart talks about time as unreal. Each view reshapes what counts as rational belief. So again, there cannot be one way, my way or highway. About time, some could hold the theory of presentism. Some might like to stand with MacTaggart, where they say time is unreal, and some would like to stand with eternalism, where they say that past, present, and future are equally real. For example, if the future already exists, eternalism, then beliefs about future events are not about non-being, they are about different temporal locations. Thus, belief is metaphysically embedded. Miller's contribution, as we can see, is she shows epistemology cannot be done without metaphysics. Belief formation depends on ontology of time, persistence of objects, indexical reference like now, here, and so on. Belief is not merely psychological, it is structurally tied to reality. Now, we have had talked about the various parallels of Indian philosophy with Nyaya, with Buddhist, with Advaita Vedanta. And what we realized about the Indian theories of time is Buddhist talks about momentariness. It is clear. For example, Dignanga and Dharma Kirti, their valid cognition excludes error and accident. Knowledge must arise from proper causal conditions. Again, it parallels against the Antilak epistemology. For the Nyaya, the theory of time is about realism about time, being realistic. Advaitas is the ultimate timeless Brahman. So be it Buddhist momentariness or Nyaya's realism or Advaita's ultimate timelessness of Brahman, they all shape to what counts as valid belief about reality, and this resonates strongly with Miller's metaphysical embedding of belief. The trajectory from Plato to Pritchard shows that knowledge must be insulated from lack. The trajectory from metaphysics of time to Miller shows that belief cannot be analyzed independently of ontology. Together, they demonstrate epistemology presupposes metaphysics. Knowledge is not merely justified belief. Belief is not merely psychological assent. Both are structurally dependent on model stability, ontological grounding, and framework commitments. Now, by now, all of us should be good to question certain aspects like does the contemporary epistemology overcome the distinction between doxa and episteme? Perhaps by now you know that it does not really do that, it rather refines it. Pritchard's Antilak epistemology's model reconstruction of Plato's insight can be brought in. Meanwhile, Miller's demonstrating that belief itself cannot be separated from metaphysical commitments about time and persistence can be highlighted. Further questions like is epistemology autonomous from metaphysics? By now you must be in a position to answer this question, which would come close to something like contemporary work would suggest it is not, and Pritchard's Hinge epistemology shows that knowledge rests on non-evidential framework commitments, while Miller's work shows belief is structured by ontological assumptions about time. Therefore, epistemology presupposes metaphysical commitments even when it attempts neutrality. So, the final takeaway from Plato to Pritchard in our discussion about knowledge and belief, we understand that knowledge must exclude accident. That is the major takeaway. From Aristotle to Miller, the takeaway has been that belief must fit the structure of reality. From Nyaya to modern analytic philosophy, reliable cognition is non-accidental cognition. The ancient episteme doxa distinction survives, but in model, virtue theoric and metaphysical forms. Also, there has been these insights about skepticism, where we understand that the skeptical problem when it comes to knowledge and belief, the radical skeptics would ask that, how do you know you are not dreaming? How do you know you are not a brain in a vat? How do you know the external world exists? So the structure of skepticism is, if I know ordinary things, I must rule out skeptical alternatives. I cannot rule them out conclusively. Therefore, I do not know ordinary things. This threatens the episteme, knowledge, and collapses into mere doxa. Similarly, with Pritchard's anti-Lux response to skepticism would be something like, knowledge requires safety. Your belief could not easily have been false. Skeptical scenarios, like brain in a vat, the dream hypothesis, are logically possible, but not nearby in model space. So ordinary knowledge can still be safe. This weakens skepticism without refuting it directly. But of course, as we know, that alone is not sufficient. About the possible, hinge epistemology side, we see that Pritchard draws on epistemology's uncertainty, where he says that some beliefs are not empirical hypotheses justified by evidence known in the usual sense. Example, there is an external world, I have two hands, the world did not begin 5 minutes ago. Here, a typical hinge commitments or commentators would state that they function as conditions of intelligibility. They are background certainties, the framework presuppositions. They are not known, but they make knowledge possible. So we see a philosophical shift. So knowledge must, which traditionally had been the case, that knowledge must justify everything. Hinge epistemology said that some commitments are irrational, neither justified nor unjustified. They are ground level, pre-evidential, framework enabling. Thus, epistemology rests on non-epistemic foundations. This is a radical insight. So, Plato grounded knowledge in forms, Aristotle grounded it in essence and demonstration, and modern hinge theory says that we cannot ground everything. Some commitments are simply enacted. Thus, the search for absolute episteme meets structural limits. And we see that modern epistemology does reveal a paradoxic scenario, that is, to defeat skepticism, we must accept non-evidential commitments. So epistemology cannot be purely justificatory. It depends on model structure, anti-Lux, cognitive ability, virtue epistemology, framework commitments, hinges. All in all, knowledge is possible, knowledge can be possible, knowledge should be possible, but it may not be absolutely grounded. With this, we come to an end to our discussion on knowledge and belief, which is a part of the syllabus Introduction to Philosophy for semester 1 students under the UGCF NAP syllabus for Department of Philosophy, University of Delhi. Thank you.